Right now, there's a £9 billion gamble being placed on Britain's housing market. And whether you're renting, buying, or just trying to get by, this one could hit you harder than you think. The government is betting big on fixing our broken housing system, but behind the shiny promises and political soundbites lies a web of risks that nobody seems to be talking about. What happens when ambitious plans meet brutal reality? What happens when the numbers don't quite add up the way they're supposed to? And more importantly, what happens to you when the cracks start to show? Before we dive deeper, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to Property Reporter so you never miss the latest updates on UK property, economy and housing news. Trust me, you'll want to stay ahead of what's coming. So let's start with what's actually on the table here. The government has committed £9 billion to a massive housing overhaul that's supposed to solve our chronic shortage of affordable homes. On paper, it sounds brilliant. Build more homes, create jobs, stimulate the economy, and give millions of people a shot at owning property. The pitch is simple, and it's exactly what voters want to hear. But scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find a plan riddled with assumptions that might not hold up when reality kicks in. This isn't just about building houses. It's about restructuring an entire sector of the economy while hoping that nothing goes catastrophically wrong along the way. Here's where it gets interesting. The bulk of this £9 billion is being funneled into what they're calling affordable housing schemes, but the definition of affordable is becoming increasingly elastic. We're talking about homes that are supposedly within reach of average earners, yet in many parts of the country, these so-called affordable properties are still priced at levels that would make your eyes water. London and the South East are particularly brutal. A flat labelled affordable might still cost you £400,000 or more, which for most people is about as affordable as a private jet. The government is banking on a model where developers build these homes in exchange for planning permissions and subsidies. But developers aren't charities. They're businesses, and businesses need to make profit. So when the sums don't work, when material costs spike, or when demand softens, what happens then? The risk is that developers walk away or water down the quality or simply build fewer homes than promised. And when that happens, it's not the politicians or the developers who suffer, it's you. Now let's talk about the construction industry itself, because this is where the gamble gets even riskier. Britain is facing a skills shortage that's borderline catastrophic. We don't have enough bricklayers, electricians, plumbers or site managers to deliver the housing targets the government has set. Post-Brexit immigration rules have made it harder to bring in skilled workers from abroad, and our domestic training programs haven't kept pace with demand. So even if the money is there, even if the land is available, we might simply lack the workforce to build what's needed. Projects could drag on for years, costs could spiral, and deadlines could be missed by miles. Every delay means more money wasted, more political capital burned, and more people left waiting for homes that never materialise. The construction sector is already stretched thin, and now we're expecting to deliver a miracle. Then there's the land issue, and this is a minefield all on its own. The government wants to unlock greenbelt land and brownfield sites to make room for all these new homes, but greenbelt development is politically toxic. Local communities fight it tooth and nail, environmental groups raise hell, and planning battles can drag on for years. Brownfield sites sound like a better option, but they come with their own problems. Many are contaminated, require expensive remediation, and are located in areas where people don't necessarily want to live. You can't just slap houses on a former industrial site and expect them to sell like hotcakes. Location matters, and infrastructure matters even more. If you build thousands of homes in an area with poor transport links, inadequate schools and overstretched healthcare, you're not solving a problem, you're creating a new one. The housing might be there, but the quality of life won't be, and that's when social tensions start to rise. Speaking of infrastructure, let's talk about what happens when you add tens of thousands of new residents to an area without upgrading the roads, trains, hospitals, and schools. The government's plan assumes that infrastructure investment will keep pace with housing development, but history tells us that's rarely the case. Infrastructure projects are slow, expensive, and politically messy. By the time a new train line or hospital gets built, the housing estates are already overcrowded and the damage is done. You end up with communities that feel neglected, services that are stretched to breaking point, and residents who resent the new developments for making their lives harder. This isn't just a logistical problem, it's a social one. When people feel like their neighbourhoods are being overwhelmed without any corresponding benefits, they push back. They vote against development, they protest, and they make life difficult for anyone trying to deliver change. The £9 billion gamble isn't just about money, it's about managing public sentiment and keeping communities on side. If that fails, the whole thing collapses. Now let's get into the economics, because this is where things could really blow up in our faces. The government is assuming that house prices will remain stable or continue to rise gently, that interest rates won't spike too dramatically, and that the economy will keep chugging along at a reasonable pace. But what if those assumptions are wrong? What if we hit another recession? What if inflation stays stubbornly high and the Bank of England is forced to keep interest rates elevated for longer than expected? Higher borrowing costs mean fewer people can afford mortgages, which means demand for housing drops, which means developers lose money and projects get shelved. The whole model depends on a delicate balance of factors staying roughly in line, but economies don't work that way. They're volatile, unpredictable, and prone to shocks. A global downturn, a spike in energy prices, a crisis in the financial sector, any of these could derail the housing plan before it even gets off the ground. And when that happens, the £9 billion doesn't buy us a solution, it buys us a very expensive failure. There's also the question of who actually benefits from all this. The official line is that these homes are for ordinary working people, for nurses and teachers, and young families struggling to get on the property ladder. But the reality is often or complicated. Affordable housing schemes have a habit of being captured by investors, by buy-to-let landlords, and by people who already own property and are looking to expand their portfolios. The system is supposed to have safeguards to prevent this, but enforcement is patchy and loopholes are easy to exploit. You end up with homes that were meant for first-time buyers being snapped up by landlords who then rent them out at market rates. The people who were supposed to benefit never get a look in, and the housing crisis just shifts shape rather than shrinking. If the government can't ensure that the right people are getting these homes, then the £9 billion is effectively being used to subsidise landlords and investors, rather than solving the problem it was meant to address. And let's not ignore the political dimension here, because this gamble is happening in a highly charged environment. Housing is one of the most emotive issues in British politics right now. Young people can't afford to buy, renters are being squeezed by soaring costs, and homeowners are worried about their property values. Every group has different interests, and they're often in direct conflict with each other. The government is trying to please everyone, and that's a recipe for policy paralysis. If house prices fall, existing homeowners get angry. If they rise, aspiring buyers get priced out. If too much development happens in one area, locals rebel. If not enough happens, the housing shortage gets worse. There's no win here, only trade-offs and compromises. The danger is that political pressure forces the government to water down the plan, to make exceptions, to delay difficult decisions until after the next election. When that happens, the £9 billion gets spent, but the outcomes are mediocre at best. We end up with a housing policy that's all talk and no delivery, and the people who need help the most are left waiting. Here's another angle that doesn't get enough attention. The environmental cost of all this construction is enormous. Building hundreds of thousands of new homes requires vast amounts of concrete, steel, glass, and timber. Concrete production alone is one of the biggest sources of carbon emissions on the planet. If the government is serious about hitting net zero targets, then this housing push needs to be done sustainably, with green materials, energy-efficient designs, and minimal environmental impact. But sustainable construction is more expensive and takes longer. It requires new skills, new technologies, and new ways of working. The industry isn't ready for that yet, and neither is the supply chain. So we're left with a choice. Do we build quickly and cheaply, hitting our housing targets but blowing our carbon budget? Or do we build sustainably, missing our targets but protecting the environment? The government hasn't squared this circle yet, and until it does, the £9 billion gamble carries an environmental risk that could come back to haunt us in ways we're only beginning to understand. Then there's the question of what happens if this all goes wrong, if the housing plan fails, if the money is wasted, if the homes don't get built, or they get built in the wrong places, or they're unaffordable despite the label. What then? The political fallout would be severe. Trust in government would take another hit. Cynicism about public spending would deepen, and the housing crisis would get even worse. But beyond the politics, there are real human consequences. People who are currently stuck in expensive rentals, in overcrowded housing, in temporary accommodation, they're banking on this plan working. They're hoping that in a few years there will be more options, more affordability, more opportunity. If those hopes are dashed, the impact on mental health, on family stability, on social cohesion could be devastating. Housing isn't just about bricks and mortar, it's about security, dignity, and the ability to build a life. When people don't have that, everything else starts to unravel. Now let's consider the international context, because Britain isn't the only country grappling with a housing crisis. Cities around the world are struggling with the same issues: soaring prices, chronic shortages, and growing inequality. Some places have tried similar large-scale interventions, and the results have been mixed at best. In some cases, ambitious housing programs have led to oversupply, with empty developments sitting unsold because the demand projections were wrong. In others, corruption and mismanagement have siphoned off funds, leaving projects half-finished and communities angry. Britain can learn from these examples, but only if the government is willing to look honestly at what works and what doesn't. The $9 billion gamble needs to be evidence-based, flexible, and responsive to changing circumstances. If it's driven by ideology or short-term political gains, it's doomed to fail. There's also a generational dimension to this that's worth unpacking. Younger generations have been systematically priced out of the housing market, while older generations have benefited from decades of rising property values. This has created a wealth gap that's fueling resentment and political division. The $9 billion housing plan is seen by many young people as a last chance for the system to deliver something for them. If it fails, if they're let down again, the political consequences could be profound. We're already seeing younger voters turning away from traditional parties, embracing more radical alternatives, and questioning the entire economic model that's left them struggling. Housing policy isn't just about homes, it's about intergenerational fairness and social stability. Get it wrong, and the fallout won't just be economic, it'll be political, and it could reshape British politics for decades to come. Let's talk about the role of local government in all this, because they're the ones who have to make it happen on the ground. Central government can throw £9 billion at the problem, but it's local councils who grant planning permissions, who manage infrastructure, and who deal with community pushback. Many councils are already overstretched and underfunded. They've been hit by years of austerity, and they simply don't have the capacity to manage large-scale housing developments. Even when they want to approve projects, they face resistance from residents, legal challenges, and political pressure. The system is slow and bureaucratic, and every delay adds to the cost and reduces the chances of success. If the government is serious about making this work, it needs to empower local authorities, give them the resources they need, and streamline the planning process. Without that, the $9 billion is just money sitting in a pot waiting to be spent, while nothing actually gets built. Another risk that's flying under the radar is the quality of the homes being built. In the rush to hit targets and deliver anew, there's a danger that standards slip. We've already seen scandals involving shoddy construction, dangerous materials, and homes that are unfit for purpose. The Grenfell tragedy exposed how badly things can go wrong when profit is prioritised over safety. If the $9 billion housing gamble leads to thousands of poorly built homes, we're not solving the crisis. We're storing up problems for the future. Homeowners will face expensive repairs, health and safety issues will arise, and the reputation of the entire programme will be trashed. Quality matters just as much as quantity, and there needs to be rigorous oversight to ensure that corners aren't being cut. So where does all this leave you? If you're renting, you might see more options in the market eventually, but it could take years, and there's no guarantee prices will come down. If you're trying to buy, the affordable label might give you a shot, but competition will be fierce, and the reality might not match the promise. If you're a homeowner, your property value could be affected by new developments nearby, for better or worse. And if you're a taxpayer, you're funding this gamble whether you like it or not. The stakes are enormous and the outcome is far from certain. The government is betting that it can thread the needle, that it can build enough homes fast enough and affordably enough to make a real difference without triggering any of the risks we've talked about. It's a gamble that requires everything to go right: the economy to stay stable, the construction industry to scale up, local authorities to cooperate, developers to play fair, and the public to stay patient. That's a lot of things that need to align, and history suggests that when governments make big bets like this, reality has a habit of intervening in uncomfortable ways. What we're witnessing is one of the most ambitious housing interventions in a generation, but ambition alone doesn't guarantee success. The $9 billion could transform the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, giving them security and opportunity they never thought possible. Or it could become a cautionary tale of good intentions meeting harsh economic and political realities. The next few years will reveal which path we're on, and by the time we know for sure, it might be too late to change course. So keep your eyes open, stay informed, and don't take the promises at face value. This gamble is being played with public money, and the consequences will be felt by all of us for years to come.